Hi everyone, I'm Aurora from Susan's family. Today, I'm going to introduce you the Ginkgo Intarsia coat from Chinese Aesthetics series. This coat comes in two sizes. The knitting methods for different sizes are almost identical. The only difference is the stitch count and row count. Here, I'll explain using the smaller size as an example. I'll provide additional details for different positions when we get there. The coat is divided into the back piece, the right front piece, the left front piece, the sleeves, the collar, and decorations. First, knit the back piece and the left and right front pieces separately. After completing them, sew together and bind off together at the shoulders. Sew up the side seams of the body. Then knit the sleeves and sew them to the armholes. After that, pick up stitches around the neckline and knit the collar. Finally, create the decorations at the required positions and assemble them. Let's start by learning how to knit the back piece. It is divided into the hem, the body, the back chest panel, and the shoulder parts. Knit each area sequentially from the bottom upwards. Use the method of alternating cable cast on for the hem. Knit back and forth. This will form a 2x2 ribbing pattern. After completing the hem, don't cut the yarn, continue knitting the body, the back chest piece, and the shoulder parts. Let's first take a look at the chart. Note that this chart is only for teaching purposes. Please follow the actual project you have in your hands. The chart is in a square format. One square represents one stitch, which corresponds to one loop when knitting. The blank area at the top here is the gap formed by decreasing stitches on the body. When counting the number of stitches in each row, simply count the number of squares, then match it with the number of loops on the needle. The method and number of stitches for casting on are marked below the chart. When knitting the piece back and forth, the arrow indicates the direction of knitting. Pay attention. The chart for the right side is read from right to left. The row numbers are marked on the right side of the chart. The chart for the wrong side is read from left to right. The row numbers are marked on the left side of the chart. Note that what is shown in this chart is all refer to the right side of the fabric piece. On the wrong side, you'll need to knit for the purl stitch key, and purl for the knit stitch key. The stitch techniques used in this knitting project will be marked accordingly on the chart. I won't list them one by one here. Next, please watch as I demonstrate the specific knitting method. First, start with cast on. Take the corresponding yarn. For specific yarn, color schemes, and needle sizes, you can refer to the detail page of our product and the paper instructions. Next, I will provide a method for starting with alternating cable cast on to create 2x2 ribbing. You can first refer to the video to learn the knitting technique, then follow the chart to knit. Please watch the demonstration. Start with alternating cable cast on. Make a slip knot with the yarn. Leave the yarn tail a little longer. This will make it easier to weave in the ends later. Pick up the corresponding circular needle with your left hand. A circular needle looks like this. It has two needle tips. You can simply knit using one of the needle tips. Insert into the loop. Slightly tighten. This is the first stitch. This stitch is a purl stitch. Hold the other needle tip with your right hand in a pencil grip. Then take the end of the yarn around your little finger. Gently pinch the yarn between your ring finger and middle finger. Place the yarn between your index finger and middle finger. This is the proper posture for knitting with straight needles. Next, place the right needle above the yarn. Insert from front to back into the loop on the left needle. Use your right index finger to bring the yarn over. Draw the yarn through. Place it onto the left needle. Don't pull the yarn too tight, otherwise, it will be difficult to pick up stitches later. This is the second stitch. This one is a knit stitch. You can see that the yarn is below. Start with a purl stitch. Place the right needle underneath the yarn. Pass it through from back to front between these two loops. Pay attention to the middle position of the two loops here. Do not pass through the loop. Yarn over. Draw the yarn through. Place it onto the left needle. This is the third stitch. This stitch is a purl stitch. You can see that the yarn is above. Continue with a knit stitch. Position the right needle above the yarn. Insert the needle. Yarn over. Draw through. This is the fourth stitch. Work one more with a purl stitch. Place the right needle below the yarn. Insert the needle. Yarn over. Draw through. This is the fifth stitch. The cast on is worked as one purl stitch. One knit stitch. Alternate and work afterward. If the yarn tail is above, work the cast on for a knit stitch. If the yarn tail is below, work the cast on for a purl stitch. Continue working until you reach the required number of stitches. After completing the necessary number of stitches, the casting on is done. My sample swatch has fewer stitches. When the actual number of cast on is larger, please pay attention to check the number of stitches. Then work row 1. The first stitch in the chart is the knit stitch key. It corresponds to working a knit stitch. The yarn is below the needle. The right straight needle goes from front to back. Insert into the first loop on the left needle. Note that it's inserting into the loop. Don't insert between the loops. Then with your right hand, yarn over, draw through, and release the loop from the left needle. That's how you knit one stitch. After knitting, there will be a braid-like texture below. This is the texture of a knit stitch. Continue afterward. The second stitch is still a knit stitch key. It corresponds to working one knit stitch. At this point, the loop is at the back, which is the loop for a purl stitch. At the same time, there is a yarn strand above the current loop. For the next stitch, the loop is in front. This is the loop for a knit stitch. We need to switch its position with the previous one. Use your right hand to pinch the bottom of the two loops on the left needle. Then release these two loops from the left needle. First, bring the loop for the purl stitch back onto the left needle from behind. Next, bring the loop for the knit stitch back onto the left needle from the front. Now the two loops have switched positions. Here, the loop for the knit stitch is in the front. After completing, knit one stitch. Insert. Yarn over and draw through. Release the loop. Finish the knit stitch. The next two stitches are purl stitch keys. Correspondingly, purl 2 stitches. Here, there are exactly 2 consecutive purl loops. You can knit them directly. Bring the yarn above the needle. Insert the right needle from back to front into the loop on the left needle. Yarn over. Draw through. Release the loop on the left needle. Complete one purl stitch. There is a texture where a strand of yarn crosses above the loop. This is the purl texture. Continue. Keep the yarn above the needle. Insert into the loop. Yarn over and draw through. Release the loop. Another purl stitch is now complete. The next 2 stitches are knit stitch keys. Start with one regular knit stitch. Pay attention when switching from purl to knit. The yarn needs to be moved down. Match the corresponding stitch. After completing, swap the positions of the next 2 loops. The knit stitch loop should be in front. You can use a straight needle to help with the swap here. First, move the 2 loops to the right needle. Then, pick up the first loop with the left needle from behind. Release the loop. Pick up the second loop with the right needle. Move it to the left needle. The loops are now swapped. Now knit 1 stitch. Then purl 2 stitches next. Continue with 2 knit stitches. Alternate with 2 purl stitches. Pay attention to swapping the positions of knit and purl loops during the process. Make sure to knit on the knit stitch loop. Purl on the purl stitch loop. Follow this method. Finish the remaining stitches. After completing the last stitch, gently tighten the starting tail of the yarn. The first row is now completed. This row is the right side of the entire piece. The starting tail is on the left side. Then proceed to work the second row. We will work this row on the wrong side. You need to knit for the purl stitch key, and purl for the knit stitch key. First, turn your work. The chart shows 2 knit stitch keys. On the wrong side, purl these stitches. So, work 2 purl stitches. The next 2 stitches are purl stitch keys. On the wrong side, knit these stitches. Match the knit stitch. Later, besides following the pattern chart, you can also refer to the texture for knitting. When you encounter a purl texture, correspondingly work a purl stitch. When you encounter a knit texture, correspondingly work a knit stitch. For this row, still alternately work 2 purl stitches and 2 knit stitches. Finish working this row. After completing the last stitch, the second row is done. For the remaining rows, you will be knitting this 2x2 ribbing. Each row alternates between 2 knit stitches and 2 purl stitches. The order of knit and purl stitches can be referenced from the chart or texture. Pay attention that odd-numbered rows are worked on the right side. Just work the corresponding stitches as shown in the chart. Even-numbered rows are worked on the wrong side. You will need to knit for the purl stitch key, and purl for the knit stitch key. This is the method for knitting 2x2 ribbing, based on the 2x2 ribbing technique shown in the video. Continue knitting until you reach the desired number of rows. Here is a sample swatch after it has been finished. Next, I will use this swatch to teach you a way to count rows. Each braid represents 1 row. The braid at the very bottom was formed by the cast-on. Start counting upwards from the braid above it. 1, 2, 3. Plus the loops on the needle also count as 1 row. So here, that makes 4 rows in total. That concludes the method for knitting the hem. After completing the hem, continue with the body section. For the body section, you'll need to switch to a different needle size. Additionally, in the first row, and along both sides of the body, decreases are required. The new stitch technique used is K2 tog and SKP. Let's start with the first row, refer to the chart and work the corresponding knit stitches. After completing it, you'll encounter a K2 tog. This is often abbreviated as K2 tog. Move the right needle from left to right, while inserting it into the first 2 loops on the left needle. Work 1 knit stitch. That completes the K2 tog. Notice that the left loop is above the right loop. Here, treat the finished knit stitch and this K2 tog as one group. For every few knit stitches you work, just decrease 1 stitch every few stitches. The pattern varies for different sizes. Pay attention and follow the chart for your specific size. I'll demonstrate it again. First, work the corresponding knit stitches. Then, make a K2 tog. That completes one group. Another thing to note is that the chart will show a sequence in parentheses, indicating one group of repeats. The number outside the parentheses indicates how many times you repeat that group. At the end of this row, there will also be a few standalone knit stitches. These will be marked in the decrease pattern as well. Everyone, follow your respective charts to finish this row. Once completed, the first row is done. For the second row, you'll knit for the purl stitch key, and purl for the knit stitch key. That means working purl stitches evenly. Continue until the end of the row. This is what the small sample looks like after completing the second row. Continue with the third row. Start with 1 knit stitch, then work 1 SKP. This is also called a SKP stitch. Slip the stitch on the left side knitwise. Then knit 1 stitch. Next, use the left needle to pick up the unworked stitch. Pass it over the worked stitch, and drop it off the needle. You'll see that the stitch on the right side ends up above the stitch on the left side. 1 SKP stitch is now completed. For any subsequent SKP stitches, complete them using this same method. Continue working knit stitches evenly. Keep going until there are 3 stitches left in this row. After that, work 1 K2 tog. Then work 1 more knit stitch. That completes the third row. For rows 4 through 8, follow the pattern of knitting on the right side, and purling on the wrong side. Work evenly. Take a look. The pattern from row 3 to row 8 is 2. Decrease once every 6 rows. Decrease 2 stitches each time. The method of decreasing is to knit one stitch at both the beginning and end of the row, then work adjacent stitches as a cluster. Note, on the left side, use the K2 tog stitch, and on the right side, use the SKP stitch, then continue knitting a few rows evenly. This completes one section of the decrease pattern. The decrease pattern for the remaining part of the body is similar to the method used here. The only difference is the number of rows between decreases. For specifics, please refer to the chart for your size. Continue following this pattern until the body section is finished. That concludes the body section. After the body is completed, we will move on to the back chest piece. Continue knitting back and forth from the body. In the first few rows, you need to decrease for the underarm. This will form the curve of the armpit. Then knit the remaining rows evenly. Let me demonstrate the method for the underarm decreases. You can learn the technique first, and then follow your chart to knit. Please watch the demonstration. I'll explain the method using this small swatch. In row 1, bind off a few stitches at the beginning. Refer to the chart for the exact number of stitches. The number of bind off stitch keys indicates how many stitches to bind off. Here, it means I need to bind off 4 stitches in a row. If there are many consecutive stitches to bind off, you can use stitch markers to separate them beforehand. Now start binding off the stitches. You can slip the first stitch, or knit it. Here, I'll slip the first stitch. Then knit 1 stitch. Next, pass the first stitch over the second stitch. That's how you bind off 1 stitch. When there's no special instruction, on the right side, we always bind off knitwise. Continue with another knit stitch. Bind off 1 stitch. Keep binding off knitwise. Keep going until there's only 1 loop left on the right of the marker. Here, I have 2 loops left. We need to bind off 1 more stitch. Now there is only 1 loop left on the right of the marker. This is the loop of the 4th stitch. We need to bind this stitch off as well. So, knit 1 more stitch and bind it off. The next stitch is the adjacent stitch of the last bind off stitch key. Here we simply knit it. Pay attention, as the stitch techniques may vary depending on the pattern. For this stitch, you need to follow the chart. After finishing it, bind off the 4th stitch as well. This way, all 4 stitches in the chart will be bound off. Continue knitting by referring to the pattern chart. Remember, the next step should start from the 2nd stitch next to the bind off stitch key. Before you start, gently tighten this loop to prevent any noticeable holes. There are no special patterns here, so we will knit all stitches. Finish this row. That concludes the first row. Now, continue with the second row. We will work this row on the wrong side. At the beginning, also bind off 4 stitches in a row. Separate first with a stitch marker. Start binding off stitches. Similarly, you can work the first stitch as a slip stitch, or you can purl it. Here, I'll do a slip stitch. Then work one purl stitch. Next, pass the first stitch over the second stitch. This way, one stitch is bound off. Continue with one more purl stitch. Bind off one stitch. When there are no special instructions, on the wrong side, you bind off purlwise. Keep purling and binding off stitches. Continue until there is only one stitch left to the right of the marker. Here, let's bind off one more stitch. Now there is only one stitch remaining to the right of the marker. That means the fourth stitch's loop remains. Bind off this last stitch as well. Therefore, you need to work one more stitch, and then bind it off. This next stitch, which is the one adjacent to the last bind off stitch key. On the wrong side, we will purl this stitch. Bind off the fourth stitch. In actual knitting, the specific stitch technique for this stitch should be followed according to the chart. This way, all 4 stitches from the diagram have been bound off. Continue to knit by referring to the chart. Pay attention, the next step should start knitting from the second stitch next to this bind off stitch key. Before knitting, slightly tighten this loop. To prevent any noticeable holes. There is no special pattern here, so we will purl all stitches. Now, the second row has been explained. Next, bind off on the right side. The method is identical to here on the first row. Bind off on the wrong side. The method is the same as here on the second row. I'll demonstrate 2 more rows. Continue with the third row. At the beginning of this row, bind off 2 stitches. First, bind off 1 stitch. On the right side, bind off knitwise. Knit 1 more stitch and bind off. Pay attention. When binding off the last stitch, the stitch you're working on should be done according to the chart. Sometimes the pattern is special, so this may not necessarily be a knit stitch. Everyone, make sure not to make a mistake. It's the same for the wrong side. Now I've bound off 2 stitches. Continue to finish this row. After it's done, continue with the fourth row. You also bind off 2 stitches at the beginning of this row. Bind off 1 stitch first. On the wrong side, bind off purlwise. Then purl 1 stitch and bind off. That way, you've bound off 2 stitches. Continue to finish this row. Now I've completed the 4th row. If you only need to bind off 1 stitch on both sides, the method is identical to the one used for binding off the first stitch earlier. This is the method for binding off underarm stitches. After completing the back piece, next, knit the shoulder parts. Here, you need to use short rows on both sides of the shoulders to form the sloping shoulder shape. At the neckline position, stitches need to be bound off to create the neck opening. After finishing, the shoulder stitches need to be placed on hold. Pay attention. The left and right here refer to the corresponding sides when the garment is worn. Next, I will demonstrate the method for knitting the shoulder short rows, binding off at the neckline, and the method for holding on stitches at the end. Remember to leave a long yarn tail when holding on the back piece, as it will be used for binding off. Everyone can start by learning, and then refer to the chart for knitting later. Please watch the demonstration, the short row technique with held stitches. For example, on the first row here, I will do a short row by holding 5 stitches on this side. That means you knit normally up to that point. And when there are 5 stitches left, you stop knitting. Here, I've finished the first row. Turn your work. Continue with the second row. At the beginning of the second row, knit a double stitch. Regardless of what stitch it is, make sure to place the yarn above the right needle. Slip the first stitch, and then tighten the yarn. If the next stitch is a purl stitch, you need to wrap the yarn, bring it to the top and then knit. If the next stitch is a knit stitch, just knit it directly. Here, I'm purling on the wrong side. You can see that. In the second row, work short rows with holding 5 stitches on this side. That means stop knitting when there are 5 stitches left at the end. After completing, turn your work. Continue with the third row. Start with a double stitch. That is, slip it purlwise. Pull tight the yarn. If the next stitch is a purl stitch, wrap the yarn again, bring it to the top and then purl. If the next stitch is a knit stitch, just knit it directly. Here, I'm working a knit stitch. Sometimes the number of stitches for each short row section is identical. Other times, it can vary due to patterns or other reasons. The number of short rows may differ. You need to follow the specific pattern chart for knitting. You can see that, at the end of the third row, you need to do a short row of 3 stitches. Note: the double stitch counts as 1 stitch here, meaning, these 3 stitches should be skipped without knitting. Now, the third row is now completed. For the fourth row, you also need to do a short row of 3 stitches at the ending. Similarly, count the double stitch as 1 stitch. After each short row, start with a double stitch at the beginning of the next row. Now, the fourth row is finished. Sometimes, you need to shape the neckline in the middle while doing short rows. You can actually refer to the chart while knitting. I will continue to finish all the rows that require short rows in this chart. Now, I have completed it. After finishing the short rows, the third row from the bottom of this chart is done. Next, we need to eliminate the row offset. That's this 9th row here. Start by eliminate the row offset on this side. I will just knit all stitches here. When you encounter a double stitch, treat it as 1 stitch and knit it. This side of the eliminating row offset is now complete. The last row needs to eliminate the row offset on this side. Here, I will purl all stitches on the wrong side. When you encounter a double stitch, treat it as 1 stitch and purl it. This is the short rows technique with held stitches. Let's learn a common method for decreasing at the collar. That is, decrease by binding off stitches to create the desired curve. Suppose this is the neckline of a front piece. Therefore, this side is the left shoulder. This side is the right shoulder. Sometimes, the shoulders require short rows. There are no short rows here. We're only explaining the neckline decreases. Let's start with the left shoulder. This chart has fewer stitches. The focus is on explaining the method. First, knit the first row of the neckline, which means starting with 13 knit stitches here. If there are more stitches, you can use stitch markers first to separate these stitches before continuing. I've already finished the first row. The remaining loops are paused for now. Then work the second row. The second row is worked on the wrong side. You can see that this row starts with binding off 3 stitches in a row. If there are more consecutive stitches to bind off, we can separate them with a stitch marker first. When starting to bind off, you can begin with one slip stitch. Then make one purl stitch. Then pass the previous stitch over the next one. That's one stitch bound off. Continue with one more purl stitch. Then bind off another stitch. Unless otherwise specified. On the wrong side, you will bind off purlwise. There is one stitch remaining to the right of the marker, which is the third stitch loop. We need to bind this stitch off. Therefore, work one more stitch and then bind it off. The next stitch is the one adjacent to the last bind off stitch key. Here, we simply work a purl stitch. Note: as stitch techniques may vary depending on the pattern, you should refer to the chart for this stitch. After finishing, bind off the third stitch. This way, all 3 stitches from the chart are bound off. Continue following the chart for knitting. Pay attention, the next step should start from the second stitch next to the bind off stitch key. Before starting, slightly tighten the yarn loop to avoid any noticeable holes. There's no special pattern here, so we will work all stitches as purl stitches. Now, that's it for row 2. Now move on to row 3. Refer to the chart and work all stitches as knit stitches. I've already finished this part. Continue with row 4. Here, you only need to bind off 2 stitches at the beginning. The method is identical to row 1. Start with one slip stitch, followed by one purl stitch. Bind off one stitch. Continue with one purl stitch. Bind off one stitch again. Slightly tighten the loop. Then work all remaining stitches as purl stitches, and finish row 5 as well. Now, I've completed row 5. Move on to row 6. At the beginning of this row, you only need to bind off one stitch. The method is identical to binding off the first stitch of row 1. After it's done, work all stitches as purl stitches. For the remaining rows, 7 and 9, Work all stitches as knit stitches. Row 8 is the same as row 6. Bind off one stitch at the beginning. Row 10 doesn't require binding off any stitches. Work normally with purl stitches. Now, I've already finished these 10 rows. In the end, there should be 6 stitches left. This is marked as, hold on, the stitches. That means we need to temporarily secure these loops. We can use a scrap yarn to hold them temporarily. If there's no special requirement for the yarn tail, leave about 15 centimeters and cut it off. Pay attention to prevent the loops from slipping off. The left shoulder is now done. Next, work on the right shoulder. Before we start knitting, we need to bind off 9 stitches in the middle first. You can use a stitch marker to separate them. Pick up the new yarn and make a slip knot with it. Slightly tighten the loop. Start with 2 knit stitches. Then bind off 1 stitch. Then work 1 more knit stitch. And bind off 1 stitch again. When there are no special instructions, on the right side, you bind off knitwise. Continue to bind off the remaining stitches. Pay attention again when binding off the last loop. This stitch you're working on is the first stitch on the left side of the bind off stitch key. You need to refer to the chart and work the corresponding stitch technique. Here, we continue with knit stitches and bind them off. After completing, start from the second stitch and finish this row. Then, on the wrong side, work the entire second row in purl stitches. Now I've already finished the second row. Continue with the third row. At the beginning, bind off 3 stitches consecutively. You can first slip 1 stitch and knit 1 stitch. Then bind off 1 stitch. Continue binding off knitwise. Now, the 3 stitches have been bound off. Continue to finish the 3rd row, and complete the 4th row as well. Now I've already finished the 4th row. The 5th row starts with binding off 2 stitches. The bind off method is identical to the first 2 stitches of the 3rd row. For the upcoming 7th and 9th rows, you also bind off 1 stitch at the beginning. The bind off method is the same as the first stitch of the 3rd row. I will continue to finish the remaining part of the right shoulder. Now I've already completed the right shoulder. There should also be 6 stitches left here, and temporarily secure these 6 stitches. This way, the method of decreasing stitches for the neckline has been explained. At this point, the knitting of the shoulder parts has been covered. Meanwhile, the knitting of the back piece has also been covered.